I've roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts. And all around me, a voice was sounding. This land was made for you and me.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
It's not Scotch whiskey in that glass, but American craft whiskey from California.
So I love your rye.
Oh, cool.
I've been pouring it for a while now.
Try this. It's brand new to market. Cool.
Santa Rosa, California is 5,321 miles away from the Whisky Show in London, but Adam Spiegel of the Sonoma County Distilling Company makes the trip to the show every year.
When I first started exporting, literally sold half a pallet. Now we're up to about 4 or 5 in just the UK market. So again, we don't spend a ton of money and time out here. I do this show once a year. I did Whiskey Live Paris as well last week. So I've been out here for a couple weeks, just kind of showing my wares and traveling different areas. I think it's important to really just be humble and have people try something and tell them what you're thinking and your mindset. And ultimately, I think they're willing to hear you out. You just kind of have to ask the right questions and be available to them. And so I think it's the availability thing that they really like about having us out here.
Spiegel is part of a growing movement among America's artisan distillers to make exports a key part of their business plans.
The biggest guys out here were Jim Beam, Jack Daniels. Bullet's really just starting to get big out here right now. So we've been able to kind of stay high with a really clean palate and allow us to be able to taste through some products and introduce 100% rye, a cherrywood smoked bourbon, have all these different things playing out in real time.
Of course, the big boys of bourbon have been exporting their whiskeys for years now.
In terms of people getting into whiskey from other spirits, I think bourbon's always been at the forefront compared to other spirits or other styles of whiskey like Scotch. So over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a shortage of whiskey, American whiskey on the market. So I think that's also helped drive the category. I believe we're now at a stage where there is more stock. There's a lot of micros opening. So the interest is definitely there.
Sukhinder Singh of the Whiskey Exchange is both an importer and retailer of American whiskeys. His business at both ends has nearly doubled during the bourbon boom of the last 5 years, as Europeans in general, and especially the British, embrace not only bourbons, but all kinds of American whiskeys.
Nowadays, they're a little bit more open and susceptible to whiskey from all around the world, really. We are sometimes seen as the little cousin of whiskey, so you do have a little bit more of a hard time to a degree. But luckily, because we've got some interesting stuff, some interesting higher ones like the single barrels, with quite a lot of level of complexity in the flavour, actually it's not that bad. We tend to find a ground somewhere. The rye and stuff will give us more spicy notes in the whiskey itself, and that will start to find a relevant place between the two of us. So the old days, 10 years ago, this was a lot harder gig. Nowadays, not so much.
And not so much, maybe putting it mildly. Whiskeys account for 70% of all U.S. spirits exports, and in 2016, the United Kingdom was the largest export market for American whiskeys by value, with European countries making up 4 of the top 5 markets.
It hasn't been all smooth sailing for American distillers trying to sell their whiskeys in the UK. That's because the Brexit vote in mid-2016 caused the value of the British pound to plunge against the US dollar, and that made the cost of American goods in the UK a lot more expensive.
It's been painful for us. We already get a break a little bit because we don't pay excise taxes when we export, but we're still even having to drop even further than just the difference from FOB to that would be for us. And so We're making substantial changes to change the export price coming to the UK because of Brexit. It's been a painful transition. Our prices are on the shelf and to retail, and to the trade, higher than what we'd ever want them to be.
Here's an example. John Little's Smooth Ambler Old Scout sells for $35.99 a bottle at Julio's Liquors in the Boston area. In London, the Whiskey Exchange's price is twice that, more than $71 a bottle. But enough British consumers are willing to pay that price to keep John Little coming back.
I think we're just starting to make some progress in that market. There's a big, Americanization movement here, it seems to be, with steaks and beef, and I think along with that, and pork, bacon, I think along that comes bourbon. And so I think it's changing a little bit.
Credit, among other things, the cocktail culture. London is one of the world's cocktail capitals, and American whiskeys are a key ingredient in both classic and modern cocktails.
Scotch only has really one or two cocktails of any note that are well known, and they're still trying to get classic cocktails in that Scotch way. When it comes to bourbon and rye, of course, there's hundreds, and it's probably one of the most cocktailed areas. So I think certainly drinks like the old-fashioned, which although obviously can be made with Scotch, do come from bourbon. They work almost as a gateway drug for people to be introduced into them, because it's only a small amount. Bitters, an orange peel and a tiny bit of sugar. You're just sweetening it up, adding a few for aromatic and kind of and citrus notes to it, which just bring it a little bit to maybe the younger, less discerning palate at first. But then you start realising the differences between having it with different bourbons, and then by the time you realise that, you start to notice the bourbons are different, and it does start to transpose, I think, into the actual trying of the bourbon a little bit later on. So it takes time. I don't think anyone necessarily is born liking whiskey. I think it's something that you grow into a little bit.
Will Europeans and others around the world keep growing into bourbon and other American whiskeys, even as new distilleries in Scotland, England, Ireland, the rest of Europe, and the rest of the world enter the market? The answer to that question will determine whether the bourbon boom turns into a bourbon bubble. For more cask-strength conversation on whiskeys, with the people who make them and the people who drink them, join us each week for WhiskyCast. In London, I'm Mark Gillespie.